Sunday on Easter, we were talking about signs of new life. And some of you were very brave and got up and mentioned things like the landscaping, like the new hearing devices, like our faith discussion groups, the faith clinics, and the men's group. But you know, there's a lot more. And so in the weeks to come, we want to be highlighting some of those things. And one of the things, a sign of new life around here, is a new ministry. And this ministry is our relationship with Wadi Fakim and our trips to Palestine and Israel. Now, why am I calling this tour kind of stuff a ministry? Because it is more than people getting together and going overseas and looking at stuff and coming back. It is an opportunity to serve. Ministry means to serve one another. And I think it serves us and them in different sorts of ways. It's not just a vacation, but it is an opportunity to go to the places that people have heard about since they've been kids in Sunday school. And hopefully this opportunity to visit the Holy Land will deepen people's faith and their understanding of what they've read in the Bible. And hopefully it'll make things become real in a way they hadn't before. On the trip I took in 2012, we were visiting the tomb of Lazarus. And one of the persons that was there had a very strong connection to this story because when he was very ill, this story was meaningful to him as he worked hard at his recovery. So it was a very deep emotional experience for him to be in that place. And I hope that all of us, as we go on these tours, will be able to connect our life experiences with some of the stories from the Bible and to find out where Jesus walked, where the prophets walked, where people were healed, where people heard the good news of God's kingdom being proclaimed. But also part of this ministry is our relationship with this little Palestinian village of Wadi Fakim. And I think if there's one thing that this ministry is about, it is a source of hope. And you know, hope is what we need to get through the day. I don't care where we live. If we live in Palestine or if we live in Oakland, hope is what we need. But our visiting them provides hope in that they tend to feel so cut off from the rest of the world, and they are, in terms of how much news do you see about Palestine, about the people, the actual people and their lives. And they think that the United States government only cares about Israel because that's all they hear over there. And so when we go and visit and talk to them and care about their lives, it's a reminder to them, a concrete sign of hope that someone knows what's going on, that they are not alone in this struggle. And so we also have helped with economic development as our visiting net brings money into the area. And with political action, as last year we got involved with trying to raise awareness about the plight of this particular village, Wadi Fakim, and Palestinians in general, as we visited legislators and had a briefing in Washington, D.C. Those are important things. But what's really important is that relationship of person to person, where they have seen the faces of Americans, of Christians, of people who care about them. These might be the only faces they ever see from outside their small world coming to them. So it is a source of hope for them. But it's also a source of hope for us. That when we are faithful, trying to do what Jesus asks us to do, to minister to the least of these, that when we are faithful, our faith can make a difference. That we can overcome barriers of politics, of nationhood, of culture, and of religion, because most of the folks in Wadi Fakim, if not all, are Muslim. And so when we act in sincerity and extends God's love in whatever way we can see and feel that it makes a difference. We are in ministry to one another. They are are a source of hope for us as we are a source of hope for them. In addition, we have raised, this little congregation, look around you, not a lot of people, raised over $10,000 for scholarships to get people there, to get our young people there. In addition, we have raised funds to get Janet Laura Lewis, the missionary here, and last year to get several people from the village here. It's a lot of money from a small group of people. You have really opened your hearts in a very concrete way, and it has made a difference. It is a source of hope and healing. So we're very anxious today to hear about our most recent pilgrims. I think I have on the list who our pilgrims have been in the past. Look how many people, 12 people from this congregation have gone. Again. Huh?
I'm not on the list.
13 people! Sorry. Lee's not on the list, but she was there. I'll vouch for that. And then the asterisks are people who have received scholarships. So, again, that's 10% of our congregation have been there. And so you see 2015, who's going to be next? Okay? So it's a great opportunity. We encourage all of you. We've had very elderly folks on this tour, and people have been able to be accommodated. So don't let anything stand in your way. So we encourage you all. So let's hear from our most recent pilgrims. I'm not sure. You have an order that you want to go in, or? Okay. Go for it.
Morning, everyone. Good morning. Okay, so when I was first asked to write a speech and present it to you guys, I was really excited because I felt like I learned so much. But when it got time to actually write it down, I had a really hard time putting it all into words. So if you guys have any questions afterwards, I would love for you guys to come and talk to me, and I'll show you pictures and whatever. Getting ready for my trip to Palestine, I had no idea what to expect. I was just really excited to see another part of the world. I got so much more out of this trip than I ever imagined. I came home with a whole new view of the world, new friends, and even a new look on my own personal future. The first few days of our trip, we stayed in Battir. It was absolutely amazing to see the holy sites I learned about all my life. We went out on a boat on the Sea of Galilee. Ironically, there's a storm going on. The group shared about hard times they've had throughout their lives and explained how they overcame them with the help of God. Seeing people so certain of their faith was incredibly touching for me because growing up kind of sucks. It's as simple as that. The older I got, the more hate I saw in this world, and that really made me doubt everything I learned at church and school about God. How could an all-loving God allow for all these terrible things to happen? It was reassuring to see people so strong in their faith. My favorite place we visited was Jericho. We got off the bus at the Mount of Temptations, and it was breathtakingly beautiful. I looked over, and I saw this huge camel behind him, and a huge drop that led to beautiful green trees everywhere. The man by the camel kept telling me to come and go for a ride, and I kept saying no until I finally gave in. The camel started standing up. Before I knew it, I was 10 feet tall, looking down at the ground terrified. A few seconds into it, I began to have fun, and it was the most amazing feeling. We moved hotels, and we were staying in Bethlehem, which was a Palestinian city. Before we started our day, we went down to a beautiful little shop to buy some souvenirs. Right outside the shop, there was this huge wall. It was at least 50 feet tall, and I couldn't see an end to the left or the right. It was the wall separating Israel and Palestine. The part that got my eye, however, was the beautiful, colorful paintings all over the wall. It made me see beauty in a terrible thing, and seeing this wall was a start to my eyes and heart being opened by the Palestinian story. This same day, our tour guide Dona brought his youngest son Yusef with him. He was about 12 and the sweetest kid ever, and melted my heart every time he tried to speak English to me and Erin. Later that day, we visited a refugee camp. I didn't like being there. It gave me this uneasy feeling in my stomach because it was so sad to see people being forced to live in such bad conditions. I saw a painting on the walls of a home, It was a butterfly, and above it, it read, "Here only butterflies and birds are free." I had no idea things like that even existed today. We met a few people living there, and they were so warm and filled with so much hope, which really got to me because at home I see people who have everything yet hold so much anger. The next day we visited Hebron. That day was incredibly emotional for me. We met a man from CPT, Christian Peacemaker Teams, and he told us stories about the settlers living there mistreating the Palestinians, especially the children. Everywhere we walked in Hebron, I saw Israeli soldiers walking around with huge guns. I couldn't imagine living somewhere where I'm not safe. We then ate the most delicious lunch cooked by two of the women from the organization, Women in Hebron. During the lunch, they both spoke about their past and how they got involved with the organization. Hearing a woman's perspective in a mainly male-run society was interesting to hear, and I'm so glad I had the opportunity to hear them speak. Jerusalem was crazy. It was a huge city with tons of people of every religion, which I wasn't used to seeing at that point in our trip. I was really glad we didn't witness any huge conflict or problems. That day for lunch, our bus driver Louie invited us into his home where his mother and his wife cooked us a huge meal. It was really yummy. We met all four of his children and talked with his mother over a coconut cake that she made. Later that night, we met with one of Michael's friend's daughters. Munar, the oldest daughter, was mine and Erin's age, and the youngest daughter was about 9. It was so fun to talk to someone our age and be able to hear what it's like to be a teenager in a completely different country. We even met up again and got dinner with a few of her friends. It was so fun to meet people. We finally made it to Wadi Fukim, where we sat in the city council as they told us about their village and their plans to make it better. Otto invited us to his home for lunch, where his wife cooked a chicken and rice dish. Later this night, we went out to dinner with many people we met from over the trip. Otto's whole family joined us for dinner, where I met his 19-year-old daughter and his 16-year-old son. We talked at dinner all night with his 3 children. The next day, all of Otto's family, except the oldest son, joined us when we visited Jacob's well. I loved getting to know Ragda, his daughter. She was so sweet and funny, and we got along very well. The following day was our free day. Me and Erin really wanted to go back to Wadi Fukim, kind of because we forgot the rocks. But we got on the sketchy little taxi with Tack, Pat, and Joyce and arrived to meet Otto's wife. She brought us into her home where she served us lunch again, and she talked with us. It was the perfect way to end our trip. This trip meant more to me than I ever imagined. I saw the world differently. I saw people with so much hope and love when they had very little to be hopeful for. I began to appreciate my easy life so much more. I live in a place where I don't have to worry about where I can and cannot go, a place where I won't be discriminated for any reason. The most meaningful part of my trip was meeting these amazing people. Not only the people I met out there, but the people in my group as well, especially Erin. Although I've known her my whole life, we've never really had the chance to just hang out and talk for a while. I know she must have gotten tired of me, but I love getting to know her, and I'm beyond happy to be able to call her one of my close friends. I learned so much from this experience. I learned about a conflict I knew little to nothing about. I learned a lot about myself. I learned I want to help people and meet people all around the world. Hopefully I get the chance to return one day and see all the people I met and learn more and help in any little way possible. I cannot thank you all enough for supporting me to go on this trip. It has meant the world to me. Thank you all so much.
As embarrassing as it is to admit now, I was probably the least prepared one to be before going to Palestine. I was caught up with finals and distracted by all the college decisions that were coming out that I simply didn't have enough time to prepare. And while I don't recommend this plan before going on a trip, I wouldn't change a thing. Because I honestly did not know what to expect, the first few days there were completely overwhelming and physically tiring. I thought that as the trip went on, I would get used to the pace and the Palestinian narrative that was being shared. But that was not the case. Instead, I found myself every day at group reflection feeling so physically and emotionally drained. It's hard to describe what touched me the most and what I will carry on from this trip. The days we went to the religious sites were interspersed between learning about the Palestinians and were very much needed. While I found the Ibrahim Mosque Church of Nativity, Mount of Olives, and Garden of Gethsemane, to name a few, to be beautiful and rich with religious significance, it was hard for me to connect on a more spiritual basis. If anything, the most significant religious event for me was the first time I heard the Muslim call to prayer when we were in Nazareth. With the window open and just listening to the foreign words reverberate across the foreign hillside, for the first time I allowed myself to realize where I was, and that I was sharing this experience with dozens of other people. This unexplainable connection to these people I didn't know was really the foundation of what I took away from my trip to Palestine. What was most touching and surprising to me was hearing from the various Palestinian individuals. Listening to the Palestinian Christians, Muslims, young, old, researchers, and volunteers, they all had the same message of their need and desire for basic human rights. It was so inspiring to have these people open up to us and treat us so kindly. We were shown hospitality wherever we went, receiving home-cooked meals and serving after serving of Arabic coffee. I felt so ashamed and embarrassed by the fact that before this trip I had known very little about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. In being able to put faces and stories to what is happening today with the conflict, this is no longer an issue I can ignore. I find it hard to believe that in Hebron, a place where Israeli settlers and Palestinian inhabitants live together, the Palestinians need to construct a makeshift roof made out of fencing to keep out the trash and waste the settlers throw onto the Palestinian vendors just below their windows. That in Wadi Fukim, a settlement by the name of Battir has sprung up and started to expand at an exponential rate. They dump their sewage water into Wadi Fukim's farmland, which negatively impacts the farmers' ability to make a living. And since the settlement is continuously looking to expand, they need more and more land and are looking to kick the Palestinians out. I find it hard to believe that as unfortunate as this is, there are so many other smaller Palestinian villages where the narrative is the same. Specifically, we went to a village, I think it was called Beit Iscariot, where we talked with the mayor, his wife, and a few other people from the village. I specifically remember how they talked about how their children, even from a young age, start to ask why their Israeli neighbors have so much more than they do. The parents were not only caught on how and when to explain to their children the divide, but also why. The mayor talked about his dwindling hope for the future of the Palestinians, and even though he was speaking Arabic, a language I remember exactly one word of, I could see in his expression that he was tired with the possibility of giving up looming so close. And how could I sit there and not want to give this other human being some kind of hope? What I think made this trip so special was that it allowed us to form face-to-face connections with a myriad of Palestinians. There's something about hearing their stories firsthand that has shaped me in one way or another, and I'm still trying to figure out how. All I know is that I have an interest in international relations that I hope to pursue, and a desire to go back to Palestine. And I just wanted to say thank you so much for all the support individuals here at church have provided. I'm so blessed and thankful to have been able to have this experience.
Before I try and channel Mike Friedrich, who is not here today, I just wanted to add a couple of personal thoughts. One is first to thank the parents of Erin and Megan. It probably was a hard decision, or they had reservations about sending their two young adult daughters, off to Palestine, Israel, but they did it in faith and trust. And so from the congregation's perspective, thank you so much. It has made a huge difference, I think, in our lives in listening to their story. So we appreciate what you've done for them and the faith and trust that you have. So now I'm channeling Mike Friedrich. So they could be taller with a beard, and I'll try to use my hands as he does. And before I begin, I would like to acknowledge Pat and Tak Yamamoto. I know they're friends with many of you, and they also are on the trip, and they're here today. and they had kindly put together a table in the social hall of some of the books and other pictures that they brought back from this trip. So I hope you get a chance to look at that. Okay, so here's Mike. So he does have a slideshow that goes with it. The chronology of our pilgrimage to Palestine and Israel is fairly straightforward. We flew to Tel Aviv Airport in Israel, where we were greeted by the above sign on a small 20-passenger bus. We were driven to Nazareth in the north of Israel, where we spent 3 nights and 2 days, visiting traditional Life of Jesus sites, such as the Sermon on the Mount and the wedding at Canaan. Everyone commemorated by a church built centuries later. We also got our first taste of Palestinian life at a Christian archbishop's school in a Muslim imam's home. From there, we traveled the Jordan Valley through Jericho, stopped off briefly on the edge of the Dead Sea, then wound our way up to Bethlehem in Palestine, where we spent the next 6 nights in 7 days. Each day was full, combining other traditional Holy Land sites with further education on Palestinian life, culminating in our time in the village of Wadi Faqih. However, I'm going to describe my impressions of the trip more thematically. We all travel with certain conscious and unconscious expectations, so that the excitement and fun of the trip will be its surprises, the things that were not expected. For me, after hearing the reports and seeing the photos of previous pilgrims, my first surprise was realizing that the famous Christian cities, Nazareth, Bethlehem, and Jerusalem, are all hill cities. The flat land is preserved for agriculture, while the people live on hillsides. The landscape reminds me of the inland San Diego, Baja, California region. This hilly landscape creates one challenge for the Palestinians living under Israel military occupation. It's very difficult for Palestinians to enter Jerusalem from the West Bank. But Jerusalem is the center of the entire region. So if Palestinians want to go from south of Jerusalem, such as from Bethlehem to the north, or vice versa, they need to travel a bypass road. This slide gives you a small idea of how windy, steep, and narrow the bypass road is. It's like going from Berkeley to Walnut Creek by the way of Tilden Park, Orinda, Moraga, back to Lafayette, over to Pleasant Hill, and finally to our destination, all over two-lane roads. Instead of the straight 30-minute highway, which the Israelis have reserved for themselves, it takes Palestinians an hour and a half. We traveled that road 3 times. We were part of the 6th Friends of Wadi Faqih trip in 5 years. Those who have been there before said life of the Palestinians is slowly worse year by year. It's clear from the pattern of the illegal Israeli settlements that the Palestinians are being squeezed slowly out of the countryside and into city clusters, which form modern-day ghettos, like those in the middle of Europe a century ago. However, amidst the opposition, I was able to record some signs of resistance and hope. This mural is on the wall of a church in Nazareth, depicting Arab Christians and Muslims, quoting the Hebrew sculpture. Also in Nazareth is a recreated 1st century village. This slide shows our Christian guide in a recreated synagogue, like the one from the story Luke 4, where Jesus announces the themes of his ministry. Our guide quietly shifted from a historical narrative to a reminder of the content of that momentous day that Jesus announced his public ministry. It was in a space like this scene that Jesus proclaimed that his calling was to free the captives. And who are the captives in Palestine today? Another small sign of resistance we encountered was in the agricultural hillside Palestinian village of Battir, about 4 or 5 miles from Wadi Hakim, situated like it along the Green Line, the armistice border between Israel and Palestine. Battir has been in existence in one form or another for over 2,000 years, when the Roman built an elaborate waterworks from the local springs. The village has recently gained recognition from the UNESCO as a World Heritage Site, and is hoping to use that designation to develop more of a tourist economy to supplement their olive orchards and other crops. We participated in our own small act of resistance. We learned early in our trip that in Wadi Hakim itself, the Israeli army had bulldozed 600 olive trees a couple of weeks before our arrival. When Pat Yamamoto heard this, she took up a collection among the trip passengers to buy us each a young olive tree. This slide shows Pat and Tack planting their trees in the shadow of the settlement towering Wadi Hakim. There's one more subtle reaction Palestinians have to occupied life. The exteriors of their homes we saw are for the most part, are plain and simple, but their interiors are another matter. This is the inside of just one floor of our bus driver's house, where he hosted us for lunch. The furniture, decorations, and overall design were very high quality. This contrast was true for all of the handful of homes we were invited to visit. This brings us to another unexpected surprise in the Wadi Hakim home of our guide, Manalsra. We were joined by Methodist minister Janet Louie, as you may recognize in the white neck scarf. You may recall when Janet visited us a couple of years ago when we took a Save Wadi Hakim photograph. Also with us was the patriarch of the Manasra family, Yusef Manasra, who is now 92 years old. We were told he is now the oldest member of the 1,400-member village. Speaking in Arabic, Yusef Manasra told us many family stories of the decades-long struggles with the Israelis to stay on the traditional Wadi Hakim lands. When he had finished, he suddenly put aside his cane, stood up, and presented his robe to Reverend Michael Yoshi. In his presentation, he said he'd come to think of Pastor Michael as his brother, and this robe was his token of appreciation. There wasn't a dry eye in the room. Pastor Michael himself was completely stunned and overwhelmed. This brings me to my final segment, the surprising spiritual moments of the trip. For example, our first full day we drove from Nazareth to the Sea of Galilee, where we visited a long series of Jesus-related sites. As we were leaving the area, suddenly, out of the window, we could see the full arch of a rainbow. Calling to mind a biblical event many centuries earlier than Jesus, when the author of the story of Noah described just such rainbow and called it a promise of God. In that location, it was impossible to just see that rainbow as a weather event. Later, when we were in the Bethlehem area, we visited Shepherd's Field, commemorating the story of the shepherds guarding their flocks the night Jesus was born. This particular chapel dates back 150 years. It's of Italian design. If I'm remembering correctly, this site is maintained by the Franciscans. When we were outside the chapel being instructed on the site's place in the biblical narrative, we could hear Gloria in Excelsis Deo, the traditional Christian hymn being sung from inside. As I ventured into the chapel itself, I discovered it was circular, and in the middle was a group of Middle Europeans from an unknown country. When they began to sing the old Latin hymn, Dona, Nobis, Pacem, give us peace, in full harmony with incredible acoustics. Catholic high school boy that I am, I full-throatedly joined in as I circled the interior. It was moving to join a group of strangers in a song like this. Unfortunately, I have no photos to represent perhaps my most intense spiritual moment, because it was not a tourist moment. The day following our visit to Shepherd's Field, we attended Sunday services at a Malachite Catholic church, a denomination ritually similar to the Orthodox Church, but still connected to the Roman Catholic Church and recognizing the Catholic Pope. While the service was conducted in Arabic, we had an English-speaking usher who made us feel very welcome and encouraged us to receive communion when the time came in the service. As I reflected in my seat afterward, it's an amazing representation of the body of Christ to join in communion at half a world away from home, in a tradition not my own, yet intimately connected across the distance and across time. My last day came on our final organized tour day. My last example came on our final organized tour day, which was spent in Jerusalem, mostly walking the Via Dolorosa, the Stations of the Cross, along miles of wonderful narrow alleys like the one shown here. This experience combined the traditional depiction of the crucifixion day of Jesus with a prepared meditation guide reflecting on each station from the perspective of the current Palestinian experience. At most stations, we were ducked into a small prayer room where one of us would read the relevant reflection and prayer. The cultural, the political, the spiritual, all blend together, just like the pilgrimage itself. I want to thank the members of this church, especially the prior Palestinian pilgrims and the members of the mission committee, who generously offset a good portion of my travel expenses, even after the congregation fully funded Erin and Megan's expenses. This was a trip of a lifetime. I encourage all of you to join in next year's trip. It will change your life.
I'm sure that everyone understands now why I talk about this, not just as a trip, but as a ministry. And it is something that we've been working on over the last couple of years, and we don't know what the future will bring. We don't know what will happen to this community. And yet it is a good experience in our faith journeys to be faithful without knowing the outcome, to be with them present in their circumstance, to offer them companionship, because that's really the source of hope, is our being with them wherever this leads. And I hope that all of you will continue on this journey, either by supporting others who go or go yourself. You know, if you really want to go, we'll find a way to make it happen. But it's a wonderful experience.